no wilder place in the lower 48 than this. With its spine of Sawtooth peaks, river of no return, and strange volcanic landscapes as desolate as the moon. It's taken some pretty hardy pioneers to transform Idaho into America's 43rd state. From the missionary who planted Idaho's very first potato, to the scientists who powered the first atomic city in the world, to an infamous daredevil who attempted to rocket across a truly hellish canyon. But it's also in Idaho that the pursuit of riches deep below has left lasting scars and led to an act of terrorism that shocked the nation. And it was here that a great Native American tribe won in battle, but lost their sacred land forever. In this rugged western state, a railroad tycoon built the world's first ski lift to help turn a sun-filled valley into a playground for the rich and famous. Near the high, jagged peaks of one of the wildest pieces of land in the nation, accessible only by foot or bush plane. Aerial Idaho soars across one of America's great river canyons and a torrent known as the Niagara of the West. All this in Idaho. Soar over Idaho, and it's possible to be convinced that this land has never been touched by humans. There are seemingly endless forests, great ancient spines of stone, and remote rivers that are still carving their way through rugged canyons, just as they have been for millennia. But take a closer look at the floors of its valleys, and you'll soon discover that they are littered with the remains of the great boom that's responsible for transforming this wild land into America's 43rd state. There are still the boom's rusting machines, the crumbling structures of old mines, and giant dredges, so heavy they were simply abandoned when the riches they processed ran out. It all started with a bunch of what seemed like tall tales back in 1860. That's when rumors of gold in a place called the Boise Basin started spreading like wildfire. Soon, scrappy prospectors began fanning out across the region and coming into conflict with the Native American tribes that originally called Idaho home. In 1862, two of these prospectors, George Grimes and Moses Splawn, decided to join forces. In August that year, they set out into the hills with a small party of 8 men. After a few days, they began sifting the sand and earth around this remote riverbed, a process known as placer mining, hoping that the rumors were actually true. Before they knew it, shiny flakes of gold started pouring through their fingers. But there were heavy risks for these miners who were searching for treasure on land that wasn't theirs. Grimes barely got a chance to enjoy his riches. Just a few days after the party's gold strike, he was shot dead. His partner, Moses Splawn, later wrote that he and Grimes had been attacked by a group of Native Americans who were trying to protect their lands. Grimes was buried close to where he fell, here in the basin, near this bubbling waterway that's been known as Grimes Creek ever since. It didn't take long for word of the expedition's discovery to get out, and within roughly 1 year of Grimes' death, an estimated 16,000 miners had arrived in the Boise Basin. A small mining camp called Bannock was transformed almost overnight into a boom town and was soon renamed Idaho City. The Boise Basin gold strike became one of the most important gold finds in American history. Within 2 decades, miners here unearthed nearly $55 million worth of gold. And Idaho was about to become its own territory. Before gold was discovered in the Boise Basin, Idaho had been part of the Oregon and Washington territories that covered much of the Northwest. Then, in 1859, Oregon was granted statehood, and the Washington Territory was enlarged to cover all of present-day Idaho. Finally, in 1863, the Idaho Territory was born and included land that would later become the states of Montana, Wyoming, and Idaho. But the new territory got off to a rocky start. At the time, most of Idaho's population were miners who lived in the south, in and around the Boise Basin. But even so, Idaho's first appointed governor, William H. Wallace, decided that the northern city of Lewiston should be the site of the new territorial capital. The first capitol building for the new territory wasn't very impressive. This tiny one-room structure is an exact replica of the original. It was here that Idaho legislators, in just their second session, voted to move the capital to a new town in the south called Boise, close to Idaho City and other mining boom towns nearby. The bill was signed by a new governor named Caleb Lyon, who championed Boise as the new capital. But many in the north protested and succeeded in getting a local Lewiston judge to block the move to Boise. A few months later, the territory's second in charge, Secretary Clinton DeWitt Smith, took matters into his own hands. On March 29, 1865, he and a group of soldiers broke into the Capitol, stuffed the territorial seal and other documents into saddlebags, and fled, with the U.S. Marshal hot on their heels. They traveled south, arriving here in this broad valley, where they declared that the town that lay at its center, Boise, was now Idaho's capital city, which it still is today. But it took nearly 30 years for Idaho to go from territory to state. It finally did, becoming America's 43rd state on July 3, 1890. And it took another 30 years for the state to build itself a new capital. No expense was spared. Soaring above it, a nearly 6-foot-tall copper eagle, now covered in gold, to celebrate the state's mineral wealth and its allegiance to the Union. While political tempers occasionally flare inside the Capitol's walls, nothing compares to the heat that lies some 3,000 feet below. The Idaho Capitol and other buildings in the Capitol complex are heated today by geothermal water, pumped from more than half a mile under the Capitol dome. It's the only state house in the country that relies on this form of clean, renewable energy to keep its legislators warm. Boise began as a U.S. Army fort during the Gold Rush in 1863 and served as an important stop on the Oregon Trail. But today, its fortunes are in high tech, not flakes of gold. It's home to the headquarters of Micron, one of the largest makers of microchips and flash memory in the world. Boise is one of the fastest growing cities in the nation. Downtown, construction crews are putting the finishing touches on the city's tallest building yet, the 323-foot tall Zions Bank Building at 8th and Main. Idaho's capital city is home to more than 200,000 people. And on fall Saturdays, 36,000 of them can squeeze into the bleachers at Bronco Stadium at Boise State University. It's the first football field in the history of the sport to have a playing field that's not green. Fans call it Smurf turf. Ever since it was installed in 1986, this synthetic blue grass has been controversial. Opposing teams claim that the Broncos' home uniforms, which are also blue, blend in with the field, making the team nearly invisible. There may be some truth to that. Between 2000 and 2012, Boise State had 78 wins and just 4 losses at home. The NCAA had debated forcing the Broncos to wear uniforms that aren't also blue. But no such ban has been put in place. At least, not yet. In 1836, the very first wagon train on the Oregon Trail rolled across these dry Idaho hills. They crossed through the homeland of a Native American tribe called the Nez Perce. At the heart of their land was the Lapwai Valley. For the Nez Perce, the term Lapwai refers to the sound that the wings of butterflies make when they fly, which made this the Valley of Butterflies. Until the 1830s, the tribe pretty much had this quiet valley to themselves, except for a few European fur traders who passed through on their search for beaver pelts. But that all changed when the 7 heavily laden down wagons rolled through the valley and ground to a halt so that 2 passengers could disembark. A Presbyterian minister named Henry Spaulding and his wife, Eliza. They'd come to start a mission with the goal of winning converts among the Nez Perce by convincing them to believe in a new God and give up their sinful ways. This small frontier church, built later in 1876, stands on the site of Spaulding's original mission. He arrived hoping his legacy would be a spiritual one. Little did Spaulding know that his biggest contribution to the Nez Perce and to Idaho would be potatoes. That very first spring, he and a few Nez Perce converts cleared fields and planted peas and potatoes with seeds Spaulding had brought with him. The first crop was a miserable failure. But the next year, Spaulding harvested 800 bushels of potatoes, worth about $388 at the time. Soon, too, the Nez Perce, who were primarily hunters and gatherers, were farming potatoes and trading them with the settlers passing by on the Oregon Trail. It was here in the Lapwai Valley that the Idaho potato was born. But while Spaulding's potatoes were here to stay, Spaulding himself wasn't. In 1847, another minister nearby was murdered by Cayuse Indians who accused him of spreading deadly diseases. Fearing for their lives, Spaulding and his wife hopped on another wagon train heading west and fled, leaving their mission and the Lapwai Valley behind. They joined what was already a flood of settlers making its way to Oregon's fertile Willamette Valley. In the middle of the 19th century, the fastest way for those settlers to get to Oregon was to cross through Idaho. It wasn't a journey for the faint of heart. Many died along the trail from disease, exposure, and even snake bite. And by the 1860s, conflicts were growing with Native American tribes that were resisting the intrusion of uninvited travelers across their lands. In 1862, 10 settlers in Idaho were ambushed and killed by Shoshone Indians, here at a place called Massacre Rocks, which lay on the Oregon Trail. Hoping to establish a safer route west, a frontier guide named Tim Goodale agreed to lead more than 1,000 settlers over a new but untested path that circled north around the Shoshone lands. But they would have to navigate this. A place known today as the Craters of the Moon National Monument and Preserve. About 15,000 years ago, the ground here exploded when a volcanic eruption spewed forth a great river of black lava. Over the following 13 centuries, 7 more volcanic events rocked this part of Idaho. Each one covered more and more of the surrounding landscape with an ever-expanding ocean of lava. Each flow cooled to create this dark, eerie landscape. Today, this lava field covers 618 square miles. And there's other evidence of what happened here. Spectacular cones, stunning craters, and sky-high buttes. Based on past events, scientists predict that this now quiet landscape will erupt again, possibly even within the next 200 years. Day in and day out, the more than 1,000 settlers in Goodale's wagon train skirted this ocean of lava. The harsh desert sun dried out their wheels, while the rough terrain caused some of the wagons to splinter into pieces, and many were simply abandoned on the trail. Some of the settlers feared they wouldn't make it, but knew that their only choices were to turn back and risk Indian attack or forge on. Finally, at the end of 3 brutal weeks, the lava suddenly came to an end, giving way to grassy plains. And the new route, now named Goodale's Cutoff, was soon a popular detour on the Oregon Trail. Today, Highway 20 runs near that original route. Drivers can wind around the craters of the moon, close to the same path that America's early pioneers did more than 150 years ago. But there is a place that Highway 20 won't take you in Idaho. A place so big and so wild, the only way to get there is by bush plane. In 1932, the popular Winter Olympics in Lake Placid, New York, triggered a winter sports boom across the U.S. One of America's richest men decided he wanted to cash in. To do it, New York Railroad tycoon Averell Harriman decided he'd build a ski resort more luxurious than any other in the world. The problem was, he had no place to put it. So he hired an Austrian count named Felix Schafgotsch to scour the American West for just the right mountain. Harriman's requirements were that it be remote, but near his rail lines, so skiers would have to rely on his trains to get there. During the winter of 1935, Schafgotsch traveled across Oregon, California, and Wyoming before finally arriving in the Wood River Valley in Idaho, located between the Bald and Dollar Mountains. What made this valley special was that it reportedly had more than 250 days of sun a year. Harriman quickly made that fact his pitch, renaming it Sun Valley to lure potential customers to his new resort. To get skiers to the top of the mountains, he installed the world's first ski lift, a faster and more comfortable alternative to the rope tows that were common at the time. To build it, Harriman and railroad engineers modified a conveyor system used to load bananas onto ships and strung it up the mountain. Today, a replica offers a glimpse of what the first ski lift looked like. When it opened, skiers could ride to the top for just 25 cents. Today, a season pass costs up to $2,000. When Harriman's luxurious lodge opened, he didn't leave anything to chance. He hired ski instructors from the Swiss Alps and ran special trains from Hollywood to catch him, to bring in movie stars. Gary Cooper, Clark Gable, and Lucille Ball were just some of those who were often spotted on the grounds of the Sun Valley Lodge. Harriman even put up some celebrities for free to generate buzz. One of those was writer Ernest Hemingway. He first came in 1939 and lived in a second-floor room with his mistress, journalist Martha Gellhorn, who later became his third wife. It was here at the Sun Valley Resort that Hemingway completed his famous novel, For Whom the Bell Tolls. Hemingway instantly fell in love with Sun Valley. When he wasn't writing or fishing, he was often spotted at the Sawtooth Club downtown. It wasn't until 1960 that Hemingway came to Sun Valley to stay, after having lived around the world, including in Key West and Cuba. He built his new house like a vault, with thick walls made from concrete blocks to protect his writing and papers from fire. But by the time Hemingway moved here for good, he was suffering from severe depression. On July 2nd, 1961, at the age of 61, he took his own life in the foyer of his Sun Valley house. Papa Hemingway, as he was fondly called, was buried under towering spruce trees in the Ketchum Cemetery. A memorial to him nearby reads, "Best of all, he loved the fall. The leaves yellow on the cottonwoods, leaves floating on the trout streams. And above the hills, the high blue, windless sky. Now, he will be part of them forever." Words that Hemingway himself once wrote as an epitaph for a friend. While Idaho's wild spaces played a big role in Hemingway's life and imagination, he only wrote one short story about the state, preferring to keep his love for this sun-filled valley and its Silver Creek to himself. But these days, that secret is out. Sun Valley is packed with the vacation homes of celebrities who jet in from Los Angeles, Seattle, and New York. One of those covers 18,000 square feet. It's the home of movie star and former California Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger. Across the valley, Schwarzenegger was given the ultimate sign of stardom, a ski run named in his honor, Arnold's Run. Since the days of Averell Harriman, Sun Valley and its surrounding hills have played roles, big and small, in more than 30 Hollywood movies. From Marilyn Monroe's How to Marry a Millionaire to Clint Eastwood's Pale Rider. Eastwood first came here in the 1940s as a child, and he's been coming back ever since. He filmed the opening titles to Pale Rider in the Sawtooth Mountains, just north of Sun Valley. These jagged pinnacles stretch like a backbone across central Idaho. Idaho has more wild and remote public lands than any state outside of Alaska. And the wildest of them all happens to be the largest single piece of protected land in the lower 48. The place known as the Frank, short for the Frank Church River of No Return Wilderness Area. Covering 2.3 million acres, the Frank stretches from the Montana border south, right across the heart of Idaho. Running through it, like giant veins, are a number of tributaries that flow into the Great Salmon River, which is also known as the River of No Return. It was named by pioneers who happily rode its rushing currents downstream, but found the water was too fast flowing for them to paddle back up. Over millennia, that rushing water carved its way through these jagged peaks called the Bighorn Crags that rise up to 10,000 feet. The Frank is named for Frank Church, who served Idaho in the U.S. Senate for 24 years before passing away in 1984. He worked tirelessly to protect Idaho's wild spaces. By his design, the Frank is not an easy place to get into. Mechanized and motorized land vehicles aren't allowed, and that even includes mountain bikes. But rafting is permitted for those willing to brave the rapids of the River of No Return. To reach the most remote areas of the Frank, the only way in is by foot or bush plane. Many hikers are dropped off on backcountry airstrips like this one, and then collected again when their hike is over. And when these small planes lift off, passengers get a chance to soar through the valleys of one of America's most stunning landscapes, where high ridges plunge into canyons below. And wildlife thrives, including one species that's only found in North America, mountain goats. Even in winter, they can survive above the tree line, thanks to their thick coats. Sharp claws in their hooves make them perfect climbers in Idaho's rugged mountains. Senator Frank Church died from cancer just days after this wilderness was named in his honor. and after years of working hard to protect wildlands across Idaho and the U.S. He knew all too well the environmental impacts that industry can have on the land, and the giant scars that can be left behind by mining the riches buried in Idaho's soil. There's no place in Idaho that's been more affected by the mining industry than a region of the north called Coeur d'Alene. It's centered around the city of Coeur d'Alene, which happens to be one of the state's biggest tourist spots, thanks in part to its famous floating green, a man-made island golf green that actually moves around this lake at the Coeur d'Alene Resort, luring thousands of golfers every year to try their luck on hole number 14. In the early 1800s, it was French fur traders that were being lured to this part of Idaho to barter for beaver pelts with local tribes. Then miners arrived, and by the end of the century, they were unearthing thousands of tons of lead and zinc every month. One of the biggest operations was the Bunker Hill and Sullivan Mine, here in the Silver Valley. It generated millions of dollars in profits for its investors, but left a terrifying legacy for those who lived here. Between 1884 and 1968, this one mine covered the valley with 100 million tons of toxic waste and exposed women and children here to dangerous levels of lead. It's now one of the largest Superfund cleanup sites in the country. The toxic hillsides around the mine were once bustling with miners who worked 24/7 to unearth treasure under Idaho's soil, and whose disputes with the company they worked for led to an act of terrorism that shocked the nation. It all started because the Bunker Hill and Sullivan Mine paid its workers much less than other mines in the region. When the miners banded together to demand a fair wage, the company offered only a modest increase and demanded the workers renounce their union membership. The miners accepted neither. On the morning of April 29, 1899, a group of miners hijacked a passenger train in Burke. As the train steamed up the Silver Valley, more miners hopped aboard and loaded on 80 boxes of dynamite. After the train pulled into the Bunker Hill and Sullivan Mine complex, the workers detonated their explosives, turning a central mill building into tinder and destroying a key piece of equipment inside, called a concentrator. 2 people died, and riots and mayhem followed. Idaho's governor at the time, Frank Steunenberg, declared martial law and called in federal troops to reestablish law and order. They responded by imprisoning up to 800 miners in cramped and filthy cells called bullpens. Less than 2 years later, in 1901, Steunenberg retired. But the Bunker Hill miners never forgot the humiliation of having been imprisoned in their fight for a fair wage. One night, the former governor arrived home, undid the latch on his gate, and was blown to smithereens by a bomb. A former Bunker Hill miner named Harry Orchard confessed to the crime. Orchard spent the last 46 years of his life here at the old Idaho State Penitentiary in Boise, which is now a museum that documents more than a century of Idaho's worst criminals and their escapes, executions, and infamous crimes. For Orchard, life inside the state pen wasn't actually that much different than working Idaho's mines. Much of his time was spent chiseling away in this rock quarry, mining sandstone used to expand his own prison's walls. That work helped the prison grow from a single cell house to a massive complex enclosed by a 17-foot high wall. Despite being a high security facility, 90 prisoners escaped from the state pen, most while on work detail, while others tunneled through the prison's brittle sandstone walls. The most famous escapee was a femme fatale named Lyda Southard, who was convicted of murdering one of her husbands. Her nickname was Flypaper Lyda, since she was accused of boiling flypaper to extract arsenic, and then feeding it to her husband some say in a freshly baked apple pie. Even for many of the state's most cold-hearted convicts, the prospect of spending the rest of their lives in the Idaho State Pen must have seemed terrifying. But for those not behind bars, many might argue that the most forbidding place in Idaho is this: a deep chasm so daunting to early travelers, they named it Hell's Canyon. In 2008, a hiker was exploring this deep Idaho canyon when he stumbled on a cache of old textiles made from cedar bark. Archaeologists later dated them to the 14th century. They belonged to the Nez Perce, who lived in this gorge for thousands of years and believed that a mythical figure they called Coyote carved its steep walls to protect the tribe. In places, those walls dropped nearly 9,000 feet to the Snake River below, making it the deepest river gorge in North America, deeper even than the Grand Canyon. But starting in 1855, the Nez Perce would have this sacred canyon and most of their lands taken from them by force. In a treaty signed in 1855, the U.S. government promised the Nez Perce rights on more than 7.5 million acres of land that stretched across present-day Oregon, Washington, and Idaho. But in 1863, after gold was found in Nez Perce territory, the U.S. government decided to take control of 90% of that same land and force the tribe to crowd onto a much smaller reservation at its heart, in the Lapwai Valley. The Nez Perce had always maintained good relations with white settlers, but for some, the injustice of losing most of their land was too much to bear, and a few young fighters retaliated, killing 18 white settlers. In 1877, the U.S. cavalry was sent in to track down and force these holdouts onto the reservation. But little did the U.S. government know, they would soon be at war with the tribe. It was here, at Whitebird Canyon, that Captain David Perry and about 100 troops finally came face to face with about 65 Nez Perce warriors. Chief Joseph sent a peace party to meet with Perry. But as they approached, one of Perry's men fired on the delegation, and an all-out firefight ensued. Perry's bugleman was the first to fall, which meant Perry now had no way to communicate orders to his soldiers in the battle. Soon, here in this valley, his men were being slaughtered. It was like two bulldogs meeting, Nez Perce warrior Yellow Wolf later recalled. We drove them back across the mountain. In the end, Perry lost more than 30 men. When Washington got word of this humiliating defeat, more troops were sent in, and soon 700 Nez Perce were on the run across Idaho. Finally, in what is now known as the Battle of Bear Paw, the Nez Perce were defeated. In October 1877, Chief Joseph agreed to lay down his arms. "Hear me, my chiefs," he told his tribe. "I am tired. My heart is sick and sad. From where the sun now stands, I will fight no more, forever." Chief Joseph and the other survivors were promised that they could return safely to the reservation in Idaho. But they were shipped by train to Oklahoma instead. The great Nez Perce chief never saw his homeland again. While he and other Nez Perce in Oklahoma would have done anything to be able to return home, there were many settlers in the Idaho Territory that wished they weren't even part of Idaho at all. That's because northern and southern Idaho were almost like two separate regions at the time, since rugged mountains and a lack of roads divided the two. In 1878, 96% of residents of the northern Panhandle approved a measure to secede and join the Washington Territory. To keep Idaho in one piece, legislators in Boise started offering concessions to the north, including a new road that would link north and south. And in 1889, they offered the ultimate concession of them all, choosing the northern town of Moscow as the site of the new University of Idaho. 1 year later, in 1890, Idaho gained statehood, with its northern panhandle intact. Today, the tensions between the North and South have pretty much subsided, except during the annual face-off between the Boise State Broncos and the Idaho Vandals in their pursuit of the Governor's Trophy. Every other year, that game was played here at University of Idaho's Kibbe Dome, until 2010, when the Boise State president announced he would no longer attend the series. A local newspaper had reported that he had found Vandals fans nasty and inebriated. In 1889, those might have been fighting words that could have caused residents of northern Idaho to pledge their allegiance forever to Washington State. But these days, no matter what team they're rooting for, North or South, they're all still Idahoans. And part of a state that has a lot to be proud of, including one of America's most impressive sights, known as the Niagara of the West. In the middle of the 19th century, Oregon Trail pioneers did everything they could to get across Idaho's vast eastern desert, just as fast as their horses, wagons, and feet would take them. But when U.S. government scientists at the Atomic Energy Commission were scouring this part of Idaho in the 1940s, they stopped in their tracks and decided this was the perfect spot to build the world's first atomic power plant. That building is now known as Experimental Breeder Reactor 1. But getting energy out of EBR-1 didn't turn out to be easy. When the reactor's power was first tested on December 20th, 1951, it only generated enough energy to light 4 200-watt light bulbs. Barely enough power for the scientists to throw a celebration party. Yet, that first baby step was still considered a wild success. But a few years later, EBR-1 showed just how dangerous atomic energy could be. During a test in 1955, a technician inserted the wrong cooling rod into the reactor. Within seconds, half the core was melting down. Luckily, workers isolated the reaction and evacuated the plant before radiation spread. But by then, Idaho had already earned a new title: the site of the first nuclear meltdown in history. In 1955, another team of scientists at the Idaho National Lab achieved a major victory in the pursuit of nuclear power. It happened in the middle of the night on Sunday, July 17th. That's when engineers at a reactor called Borax 3, which once stood here, flicked a switch and powered the nearby city of Arco with nuclear energy. The scientists kept it a secret for a week before revealing to the residents of Arco and the world that the test had actually happened and had been a success. Today, City Hall proudly displays its moniker, the first atomic city in the world. From Arco, the Idaho desert stretches west. But while it may be dry on the surface, deep underground is a watery world called the Big Lost River. When water from nearby mountains reaches this stretch of desert, the porous basalt soil acts like a giant sponge, and the water simply disappears underground. But it keeps moving very slowly south. 200 years later, and 120 miles away, it finally re-emerges in a spectacular display. These are just some of the hundreds of waterfalls known as Thousand Springs Falls outside of Hagerman, where water from the Big Lost River finally appears again, cascading down steep bluffs to join the Snake River below. The water in Thousand Springs Falls is crystal clear and oxygen-rich, thanks to being filtered in volcanic soil for close to 2 centuries. In 1928, Jack and Selma Tingey decided to reroute water from Thousand Springs to their newly built fish hatchery. The clean, clear water proved to be perfect for the fish. And today, hatcheries along this stretch of the Snake River raise 70% of all trout eaten in the U.S. Long before people raised fish here on the banks of the Snake River, and built the dams that line it today, this was once home to one of the world's great salmon runs. Every summer, so many Pacific salmon fought their way upstream to spawn that Native American fishermen could throw a spear just about anywhere to catch a meal. But the fish could only go so far upstream. When they reached this wall of stone, they were left swimming in circles below. It's known as the Niagara of the West, Shoshone Falls. Even in the dry summer season, these waterfalls still cascade down more than 200 feet, making the Shoshone Falls 46 feet taller than their New York cousin. But as the Idaho snow melts each spring, Shoshone Falls is transformed into one of Idaho's great natural wonders. An impressive torrent of water that's best experienced from the air. But while the water of the Snake River has carved some of America's most dramatic canyons, it's also given birth to valleys rich with fields and farms. When summer arrives in Idaho, canola flowers blanket close to 40,000 acres of the state. In the south, they've helped make the Snake River Valley Idaho's farming epicenter and helped earn it the title Magic Valley. It was here that Idaho's first potato billionaire got his start. In 1924, a young farmer named John Richard Simplot quit school and went into farming for himself. He leased 120 acres of land and grew potatoes, then reinvested his profits. Business boomed. In the 1950s, Simplot pioneered a method to freeze-dry French fries so they could be shipped all over the country. In 1967, he made a deal with McDonald's founder Ray Kroc. Simplot would be the primary supplier of frozen fries for the giant fast food chain. Today, the Simplot company rakes in billions every year. J.R. Simplot passed away in 2008 at the age of 99, but his legacy lives on with every fry sold. Running right through Idaho's potato country is the Snake River Gorge. The only way to get across it here outside Twin Falls is to take the Perrin Bridge, which was once the highest bridge in the world when it was built in 1927. But when a famous daredevil named Evel Knievel arrived in this part of Idaho, he decided he would try to cross the canyon not by the bridge, but in the air. In the early 1970s, Knievel decided he wanted to jump the Grand Canyon on a motorcycle. But the U.S. government said no. So, he scouted the country by helicopter, searching for a comparable challenge. He got excited when he discovered this 1,600-foot wide gap along the Snake River, downstream from Hell's Canyon. Knievel went to work, leasing land on both sides of the river. Then, on top of this angled dirt mound, his team built a giant 180-foot-high launch structure, which is now gone. On September 8, 1974, Knievel climbed into his steam-powered rocket, the SkyCycle X2. He'd predicted he would reach a speed of 200 miles per hour during launch and 350 while in the air. A crowd of thousands looked on, and millions more watched on television as a crane lowered Knievel into the rocket. The SkyCycle's engine fired, then shot him up the ramp and into the sky. But then, something went wrong. Knievel's parachute system deployed too early and brought the rocket to a stop in midair. As it floated down, it looked as if Knievel would land in the rushing Snake River. But strong canyon winds blew him backwards to the rocks just in time. He survived with only a broken nose. Not bad for a daredevil who had broken over 40 bones in his lifetime. The Snake River Canyon jump was one of the last for the aging Knievel and proved that there just might be places in Idaho that humans can't conquer. And with so much wilderness in this rugged western state, it's not hard to see why. While native tribes found ways to survive here, even in its most hellish canyons, Idaho has always been a land that's challenged its pioneers. From the miners who risked their lives in their pursuit of gold, to the settlers who navigated great fields of lava and towering craters on their journeys west, to the scientists who lit up the first atomic city in the world, and the rafters who ride the river of no return. These are the people that call the wildest land in the lower 48 home. This is Idaho.